It started with a laugh. One of those polite practice laughs on late-night TV. Not quite funny, but just enough to keep the tension down. Jasmine Crockett sat across from Bill Maher on a polished set under warm studio lights, introduced as one of the most fearless voices in Congress. Applause rolled in like clockwork. But the real show hadn't started yet. What looked like a casual interview was already teetering on the edge of something deeper. Bill was at ease, snark in his tone, confidence in his smile. Jasmine? She was poised, watching, listening. And though everything on screen seemed civil, almost cozy, there was a storm quietly brewing just beneath the surface. It wasn't the kind of storm you see coming. It was the kind that creeps in through a single sentence. The kind of sentence that seems harmless to those who've never had to carry its weight. And when it finally landed, it didn't just shift the conversation. It shattered the illusion. Before we get too deep, tap like and subscribe if stories like this keep you up thinking. And if you're watching right now, drop your state and the time you're tuning in. We want to know who's still awake with us. Dim the lights, turn down the world. This is where the silence breaks. The conversation had been easy. Too easy. Bill Maher leaned back in his chair, sipping from a mug he didn't really need. The segment was moving along like any other late-night political gab. Playful banter, performative disagreement, two talking heads pretending to find middle ground. They joked about Congress being chaotic. They traded shots about social media outrage. Jasmine held her own. Cool, articulate, careful with her tone. She knew the game. She'd played it before. And then Bill said it. You know, he chuckled, almost like he didn't mean it. Maybe if people stopped acting like victims all the time, we could actually have a real conversation. The studio didn't go silent, not right away. The audience laughed. Not a full laugh, more like a nervous one. Trained to respond to punchlines, programmed for rhythm. But Jasmine didn't laugh. She didn't flinch, didn't fire back. She just looked at him. A long pause, the kind that twists in your gut. Then she asked, her voice soft and even, Bill, do you know what it feels like to walk into a hospital and the nurse assumes you're the aide, not the patient? Silence. This time, the real kind. Not a bit, not a setup, just stillness. Bill didn't have a response ready. He blinked, unsure if it was a trap or a test. But Jasmine wasn't performing. She wasn't swinging back. She was opening a door he hadn't seen and now couldn't unsee. Her voice didn't rise. It sank into something deeper. My mother once sat in an ER for 5 hours with chest pains, she continued, eyes focused on the air between them. No one came. They thought she was just there with someone else. Didn't even ask her name. The lights of the studio seemed to dim. Not literally and just emotionally. Jasmine wasn't making a point. She was remembering pain. She didn't want to sue. She didn't want to make a scene. She just wanted someone to see her. Bill's hand, which had been resting casually on the desk, now fidgeted with his notes. He wasn't smirking anymore. There was no comeback lined up, no clever deflection, because this wasn't about debate. This was about dignity. The air shifted in the room. The audience, sensing the break in rhythm, sat still. Some looked down. One woman in the second row wiped at her eye. What started as an episode of late-night commentary was becoming something heavier, something raw. And Jasmine? She was still sitting straight, still in control, but her voice had that unmistakable edge, the kind that comes from holding back tears that deserve to fall. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was tired. Tired of the coded language, tired of the microaggressions that came wrapped in jokes, tired of people who talk about equality like it's an inconvenience, or worse, a lie. Every time someone says stop playing the victim, what they're really saying is, your pain makes me uncomfortable. That line landed hard. You could feel it in the silence. The discomfort wasn't just on Bill's face. It was rippling through the audience, bouncing off every bright, sanitized wall of that polished studio. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. And Bill, the man who made a career out of calling out hypocrisy, skewering both sides, refusing political correctness, suddenly looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own chair, not because Jasmine had embarrassed him, but because she had told the truth. And the truth was unpolished, unscripted, and utterly devastating. Bill Maher took a slow breath, long enough to signal he wasn't ready to apologize, but not long enough to admit he might have crossed a line. He shifted in his seat, adjusted his posture. This wasn't new to him. He'd been in hot water before. He'd said things that stirred backlash, and he'd always survived it. That was his brand, the unapologetic provocateur, the equal opportunity offender. But tonight was different. Not because Jasmine Crockett had owned him, she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't cut him off, but because she made him feel something that was far more dangerous on live TV than anger. She made him feel exposed. So he did what people like him are trained to do. He got clever. He began, letting out a forced chuckle. I get it. I do, but there's a fine line between raising awareness and cultivating a victim complex, right? The words were smooth, like oil. They didn't sound hostile. They sounded reasonable, measured. The kind of language that says, I'm not the problem. Your sensitivity is. He leaned forward slightly, tone casual. We've all had bad experiences. I've been pulled over too. I've been mistaken for the help at a Beverly Hills party. It's not always about race. Sometimes people are just idiots. There it was, the minimization. A polished deflection wrapped in humor. Jasmine didn't flinch, so Bill pushed further. Look, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist, but come on, Jasmine. You're a congresswoman. You made it. You're powerful. You've got followers. You've got a platform. Is it really that oppressive out there if someone like you can rise to the top? There it was again, the bootstrap myth, as if individual success could negate systemic failure. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Bill wasn't yelling, he was smiling. But it was the kind of smile you give when you're trying to win, not understand. The kind that weaponizes statistics without touching a single soul. And let's be honest, he added, now with a little more bite. This idea that America is just a big racist machine, come on, you're not in the hood anymore. You're not some ghetto kid trying to survive. You're in Congress. Doesn't that mean we've made progress? The air tightened. He didn't say ghetto with hate. He said it with pity, which for Jasmine Crockett cut even deeper. Because that's the most insidious version of racism. The kind that smiles at you while implying you're only special because you escaped the people who look like you. And still Jasmine didn't interrupt. She watched. Bill's voice grew a little louder, not from rage, but from growing confidence. The kind of energy a man gets when he thinks he's regaining control of the narrative. Do you really want America to believe it's forever guilty just because some nurse didn't recognize your mom in the ER? People make mistakes. Doesn't make them racist. Then came the smirk, and with it, the pivot. You know what I think? He asked, rhetorically, of course. I think people have become addicted to outrage, especially in certain communities. Because if you don't have oppression to point at, then what are you going to blame for failure? That did it. A low murmur ran through the audience. Not gasps, just discomfort. Some didn't even catch the full weight of the implication. But Jasmine did. Certain communities. She knew what he meant. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. It wasn't subtle. It was the dog whistle that had echoed for decades. The implication that poverty and pain in black neighborhoods wasn't a result of policies, but of personal failures, of laziness, of violence, of being too angry, too dramatic, too dependent on the system. The kind of thinking that leads to phrases like welfare queen, super predator, thug, hood rat. He hadn't said them out loud, but they were hovering just beneath every syllable. Bill Maher didn't see himself as racist. That was the trick. People like him rarely do, because they don't burn crosses. They burn credibility. They don't say the N-word. They say inner city culture and let the audience fill in the blank. And Jasmine, she sat still not responding. Not yet, because she understood something Bill didn't. The louder they get, the more they reveal. And tonight he was about to say more than he realized. Jasmine Crockett sat still like a lioness in the tall grass. Not because she was afraid, not because she didn't have a response, But because she understood something ancient, something passed down through every generation of black women who ever had to listen to a room full of men explain her life to her. She knew the power of silence, and tonight it was her greatest weapon. Bill Maher had done what so many others before him had done, taken her story, stripped it of context, and reduced it to a punchline for progress. He mistook her presence in Congress as proof that racism was over. That success invalidated suffering. But Jasmine knew better. She had sat through hearings where her voice was ignored until a white male colleague repeated her point. She had been called angry for speaking firmly, emotional for advocating compassion, and divisive for simply telling the truth. So no, she didn't rush to defend herself. She let the silence grow, and it did. It spread across the studio like fog. Bill looked at her, waiting for a response, expecting a jab, a quote, a quip, but Jasmine gave him none. Just quiet, measured, intentional. In the control room, producers shifted in their seats. This wasn't how the show was supposed to go. The rhythm was off, the tempo had slowed to a crawl, but the camera stayed on her, frozen in that moment between what had just been said and what was about to be answered. She adjusted her posture slightly, crossed one leg over the other, and breathed. Not just for composure, but for control. Because every second she held that silence, she forced the audience to sit with what had been said. No deflection, no cutaway, no laugh track to dilute the discomfort. She let his words echo, addicted to outrage. Certain communities. You're not in the hood anymore. These weren't random slips. They were fragments of a worldview, one that sounded intellectual, but was built on a foundation of selective empathy and historical blindness. And Jasmine? She'd seen it before. In courtrooms where black defendants were called thugs before their names were read. In policy debates where poverty was explained without mentioning redlining, school funding, or voter suppression. In polite dinner parties where white guests whispered words like inner city, the way others might whisper cancer. She had filed it all away. Every insult is dressed as insight, every theory that erased her community in the name of objectivity. And now, in this moment, she let it replay in her mind like evidence, because that's what it was. Evidence of how racism no longer needed torches or slurs. It just needed comfort. A room full of people too comfortable to challenge what they'd been taught, and too privileged to notice who gets left behind when systems progress. Jasmine's silence wasn't empty. It was building, and Bill felt it. He shifted again, tried to break the tension with a nervous laugh. I mean, hey, don't cancel me just yet. But it didn't land, because he knew somewhere deep inside that he hadn't been canceled. He'd just been seen, fully, clearly, perhaps for the first time, and that scared him more than any viral clip ever could. Jasmine finally leaned forward, just slightly. Not to speak, but to reclaim the space. Her fingers touched the edge of the desk, grounding herself, anchoring the storm inside her. She wasn't just preparing to answer Bill Maher. She was preparing to educate him, to hold up a mirror, not just to him, but to the millions watching. The ones who nod when they hear phrases like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, not realizing that some people were never given boots. And the ones who think a law degree and a house seat mean Jasmine never had to walk past locked doors or lowered eyes, or the sound of car doors clicking shut at gas stations. Bill began to speak again, searching, stumbling, but Jasmine gently lifted a hand. Not to silence him, but to say without words, not yet. And in that gesture, in that stillness, she reclaimed the entire room. Jasmine Crockett finally spoke, but not with a raised voice, not with venom. She spoke like someone who had waited too long for the room to be quiet enough to hear what needed to be said. Bill, she said evenly, I know you believe you're just being logical, that you're pushing back against what you see as emotional arguments. But let me ask you something. She turned slightly, making sure her eyes met his. When was the last time someone assumed you were dangerous? Just for existing. Bill opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She didn't wait. You say I've made it. You point to my seat in Congress like it proves racism is over. But you skipped the part about how many locked doors I had to bang on. You skipped the part where I was denied internships because my hair wasn't professional. You skipped the part where my white colleagues are still called sir in meetings while I get, hey girl. You skipped the part where a donor once asked if I grew up with a father. The audience was silent, eyes wide, some mouths slightly open. You keep saying I'm not from the hood anymore, but let me remind you of something. Success doesn't erase where we come from. It exposes how hard we had to work to survive it. Then she reached for something beneath her chair, a small stack of printed pages. She lifted them carefully. You want data? Let's do data. She held up the first page. 1. Black women in America are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women, even when controlling for income and education. That's not my opinion. That's from the CDC, Bill. She flipped the page. 2. Black home loan applicants are denied at a rate 84% higher than white applicants, according to the Urban Institute. So tell me again about bootstraps. Another page. 3. A 2022 study from Yale found that teachers, including black ones, are more likely to perceive black children as older and less innocent than white children. That starts in kindergarten. Not college, not crime scenes, kindergarten. Bill sat back, his lips pressed into a line. This wasn't theory anymore. This was indictment. Not of him, but of the worldview he'd been selling. One where racism was just a leftover emotion, not an engineered structure. A worldview where feelings were suspect, but systems got a pass. Jasmine leaned in just a little. You think the problem is that we talk about injustice too much. I think the problem is that we've normalized it. Then came the question that broke the room. If your freedom depended on people not believing me, would you still call yourself fair? Bill blinked. Hard. That question didn't come from anger. It came from a place that was far more dangerous to a man like him. Clarity. Jasmine had flipped the script. Now he was on the defensive, and she hadn't raised her voice once. You call it outrage culture. I call it survival instinct. The air was razor sharp now. Jasmine's voice stayed calm, but her words cut clean. You said I've made it, so I shouldn't complain. But Bill, people don't stop bleeding just because they're in a nice room. Power doesn't cancel pain. It just gives you better lighting to expose it. The applause didn't start all at once. It began with one person, then another, then a ripple. It wasn't the rowdy kind. It was the kind that comes when people don't know whether to clap or cry. Bill shifted again, but this time it wasn't about control. It was about retreat. He tried to smile. A joke might have saved him 2 minutes ago, but now that moment had passed. Jasmine hadn't come for a fight. She came with receipts, with stories, with statistics, and with a dignity so sharp it made mockery impossible. So if you want to have a real conversation, she said, her tone still steady, then let's not pretend like pain is exaggeration. Let's not call survival victimhood, and let's not confuse silence with peace. Boom. That was the line, the one that would go viral, the one that would echo across timelines and comment sections and dorm rooms and church basements. Let's not confuse silence with peace. She didn't drop the mic. She didn't need to. She was the mic. Bill Maher blinked again, harder this time. He licked his lips. A nervous tick, maybe. Or maybe the taste of losing his grip on a room he once controlled with ease. The applause from Jasmine's last line, let's not confuse silence with peace, was still fading when he leaned forward and tried to reclaim the table. But something had shifted, and not just in the audience, in him. Okay, he began, voice pitched a little higher. I get it. You've got the facts, you've got the stories, but come on. It's not like white people are out here living some fairy tale either. It was a deflection, a cheap one, but the crack had begun. I mean, you talk about injustice, and sure, it exists, but sometimes I wonder, is this really about equality? Or is this about payback? His tone was no longer curious. It was defensive, wounded. And that was when the old playbook came out. You know, I've supported civil rights my whole career. I marched, I've had black friends on this show for decades. Hell, I've dated black women. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't even blink. Because she saw it coming. She'd heard it before. That tired resume of proximity, as if proximity were proof of principle. Bill pressed on, sensing he was slipping, but too prideful to stop. You know what frustrates people like me? It's the idea that if we don't nod along with every claim of systemic this or institutional that, suddenly we're bigots. He laughed nervously, like sorry for being white and successful, I guess. There it was, the mon, the fracture, the moment where defensiveness became victimhood. Some in the audience stiffened. A few glanced at each other. They weren't sure if it was satire or sincerity, but Jasmine knew that wasn't satire. That was the sound of entitlement under pressure. Bill leaned back, arms crossed now. And let's be honest, Jasmine, some people do play the system. I mean, not everyone in the inner city is Rosa Parks. Some people just don't want to work. Some people choose the lifestyle they live in. There it was, the poison beneath the polish. He didn't use the word thug, but it hung there. He didn't say welfare queen, but it hovered between the syllables. He didn't drop the N-word, No, he was too media savvy for that, but he didn't have to, because the venom was already in the tone, in the subtext, in the roll of the eyes when he said, choose the lifestyle. And then he reached too far. Look, I'm not saying all black folks are lazy. I'm just saying maybe we should stop pretending that every struggle is someone else's fault. That mindset, that whole victim mentality, it's toxic. It's turned too many people into professional martyrs. Boom, the audience pulled back collectively, because that wasn't commentary. That was contempt. And the irony? Bill Maher had just done the very thing he accused Jasmine of doing. He made himself the victim of truth, of history, of being held accountable. He had all the signs, the trembling jawline, the rapid-fire justifications, the way he suddenly talked at her instead of to her. Jasmine sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap. The only movement, her eyes, sharp and steady, never breaking contact. Bill's final words in that moment were muttered, almost under his breath, but the mic still caught them. This is what happens when you make everything about race. And just like that, the mask was gone. The studio fell quiet, not the stunned kind, the ashamed kind. Even the sound crew paused. There was nothing to mix, just tension, the kind that can't be edited out. What Bill didn't know or couldn't admit was that he'd just proved Jasmine's entire point. He hadn't debated. He'd unraveled. Piece by piece, privilege exposed. And for the first time all night, it wasn't Jasmine who looked like the powerful one. It was Bill Wickeson, alone in his posture, drowning in the weight of his own defensiveness, who looked small. The clip went viral before the credits even rolled. Within 20 minutes of the show's end, the moment where Jasmine Crockett said, "Let's not confuse silence with peace," had already racked up over 800,000 views across TikTok, X, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts. Within an hour, it was being dissected by political analysts, stitched by activists, and looped by kids in dorm rooms who'd never watched real time before that night. But the reaction, split, sharp, unforgiving. On one side, the defenders of Bill Maher. They flooded the comments with familiar refrains. He said what everyone's thinking. People need to stop being so sensitive. It's not racist to ask questions. And then came the dog whistles disguised as insight. Why is it only racist when a white man talks? She pulled the race card. Classic move. She's just another angry black woman trying to guilt trip people. It was coordinated, not by one person, but by a machine, the algorithmic beast that feeds on division. And the first accounts to post those comments, most of them had no profile pics, no names, just usernames like Patriot Truth 45 and Red Blood Real Talk, bots, or worse, paid agitators. A whisper campaign disguised as public opinion. But the other side, that was real, and it was growing. It started small, a comment from a nurse in Detroit. "I've seen this happen to black patients. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't speak up. Jasmine, thank you." Then a black mother in Dallas. I watched this with my daughter. We both cried. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for all of us. Then a white teacher in rural Pennsylvania. I didn't understand privilege until I saw how calm she stayed while he got so angry. That's strength I've never had to develop. And then the tipping point came. A 17-year-old high schooler from Oakland uploaded a TikTok breaking down every statistic Jasmine had cited. In less than 60 seconds, she linked them to real sources. CDC, Urban Institute, Yale Studies. She ended the clip with, "She wasn't emotional, she was exact. And y'all are just mad she didn't need to scream to be heard." The video hit 3 million views in 24 hours. Suddenly, the conversation changed. Mainstream media couldn't ignore it. CNN ran a segment titled, "When Truth Disrupts Comfort, Jasmine Crockett and the New Civil Discourse." The Root called it a masterclass in grace under fire. Even The Atlantic cautiously admitted Jasmine Crockett didn't confront Bill Maher to win a debate. She forced America to look in the mirror. But it wasn't just media, it was movement. Churches played the clip during Sunday service. HBCU professors cited it in class. College students printed her quote, "Power doesn't cancel pain. It just gives you better lighting to expose it." On posters. And in the halls of Congress? Whispers. A few colleagues who had never spoken to Jasmine now stopped her to say, "That was powerful." Some said it was sincerity. Others said it like a political calculation. But it didn't matter, because what Jasmine had done couldn't be undone. She hadn't just won the moment. She had shifted the conversation, away from Bill, away from guilt, and straight into accountability. Meanwhile, Bill Maher stayed mostly silent. His team issued a lukewarm tweet. "Real time is about tough conversations. We welcome all voices, even when we disagree. Thank you to Reptiles Crockett for joining us." But it was too late. He hadn't just lost a debate. He'd lost his grip on the narrative. The same fans who once called him brave were now calling him bitter. Because when the truth lands quietly and the response is rage, it reveals who's really afraid. And Jasmine? She didn't do a victory tour. No interviews. No self-congratulatory tweets. Her only public post was a quote from Maya Angelou. "I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. The message was clear. This wasn't about clapping back. This was about calling forward a new kind of power, one built on truth, not volume. And the people? They were listening. Finally. The moment didn't feel like thunder when it first landed. It was quiet, controlled, said with a calm that made it more haunting. It came 42 minutes into the interview, long after the shouting had faded, long after Bill Maher's last attempt to salvage his ego with a condescending smile. Jasmine Crockett looked at him, but also through him, and said, "You keep telling me how far we've come, but what I see is how far some people will go to pretend we're already there." Silence. Not the kind that asks for applause, the kind that demands reflection. Bill didn't respond. He couldn't. The words had already pierced through the room, the screen, and then the world. Within 5 minutes, the clip hit Twitter, now X. Within 30, it was on TikTok with the caption, "The line that ended him. How far some people will go. Jasmine Crockett." Hashtag mic drop moment. It spread like wildfire, sound bites, duets, stitches. Creators from every corner of the platform repeated the quote, some whispering it over moody jazz, others screaming it over footage of police brutality, housing discrimination, and voter suppression. Memes exploded. Jasmine at the desk, face calm, words like a blade. Bill frozen mid-blink, stunned like a deer in the spotlight of justice. People weren't just repeating the line, they were living it. In Kansas, a teacher projected the clip in her U.S. government class. Her students, mostly white, sat in stunned silence before a 17-year-old raised his hand and said, I never realized how often we celebrate progress while ignoring pain." In Georgia, a black barbershop paused the music to replay it 3 times. In the Bronx, a muralist started sketching the quote on a train overpass with Jasmine's silhouette next to it. Not screaming, not angry, just still. The hashtag how far we go trended for 48 hours. But it wasn't about virality, it was about validation. For every single person who had ever been told it's not that bad. We've moved on. You should be grateful. You're exaggerating. Jasmine's words cut through decades of gaslighting. And just like that, the moment became more than Jasmine. It became movement. BEAT invited her for a special segment titled The New Voice of Black Resolve. Trevor Noah tweeted, "That wasn't just a clapback. That was scripture." Common posted it on Instagram with a single caption, "Truth doesn't shout, it echoes." Even those outside the Black community couldn't deny it. A surprising voice joined in, former Republican strategist Tara Setmeyer. That line? That was history being corrected in real time. And no, it wasn't woke, it was awake. The viral moment had an impact, but more importantly, it had roots. Because Jasmine's quote didn't come from a PR team. It came from lived experience, from courtroom silence, from family dinners where no one spoke about the racism they swallowed at work, from Sunday sermons where the pastor had to remind everyone they were worthy because the world refused to. You keep telling me how far we've come, but what I see is how far some people will go to pretend we're already there. That line got printed on t-shirts by sunrise, painted on protest signs by noon, projected onto the side of an apartment building in Chicago by nightfall. It wasn't just viral, it was visceral, because in that one sentence, Jasmine had undone years of rhetorical sleight of hand, the kind that uses words like colorblind, post-racial, and equal opportunity to hide the scars that still bleed under the surface. She didn't scream, she didn't curse, she didn't even stand up. But the internet, the streets, the souls of a weary generation, they stood for her, not because she was the loudest, but because she was the clearest. And when the smoke cleared and the network scrambled to book her for more airtime, Jasmine quietly returned to work. No entourage, no big announcement. Because for her, that line wasn't a moment. It was a mirror, and she held it steady for everyone to see. 3 days after the episode aired, Jasmine Crockett's phone didn't stop vibrating. Not with praise from pundits, not with invites from late-night shows or political influencers. No, her inbox was full of stories. Real ones. From people who saw themselves not in her seat, but in her silence. A woman from Tulsa messaged, "I've been quiet about what happened to my brother in the system for 15 years. After watching you, I finally said his name out loud." A public defender in Mississippi wrote, "We replayed that moment in the office, not to cheer, to remember why we do this." Even a retired teacher from Ohio, white and in her 70s, emailed, "I used to think I was being fair by not talking about race. Now I realize I was just afraid to be honest." It wasn't just that Jasmine had won, it's that her voice gave others permission to use theirs. The ripple effect was quiet, but it was everywhere. In a middle school in Baltimore, a teacher rewrote the week's lesson plan. Instead of reviewing the Bill of Rights, she asked her 8th grade students, "What does it mean to confuse silence with peace?" They filled an entire whiteboard with answers. It means pretending everything's okay when it's not. It means being scared to speak because you might lose your job. It means you don't want to fight anymore, so you lie and say you're fine. These weren't quotes from adults. These were 13-year-olds. And yet, they got it. In Milwaukee, a community center saw a sudden uptick in young adults signing up for voter education workshops. The director asked why. A girl in a purple hoodie shrugged and said, "That Jasmine lady, she made me feel like I should stop waiting for someone to fix it." In Congress, something rare happened. A few lawmakers, notably women of color, cited Jasmine's moment on the floor. Not in formal hearings, but in the hallways, in coffee lines, in that in-between space where real change often starts. The small talk before the big decisions. One freshman member from Illinois whispered, "You shook something loose. I didn't know we were allowed to be that honest." But not everyone celebrated. Fox News spun the narrative fast. One host accused Jasmine of injecting racial grievance into a comedy show. Another called her part of the outrage industrial complex. A right-wing commentator tweeted, "This is why we can't have dialogue, because everything turns into a lecture." But the more they barked, the more it backfired. Because people weren't watching their clips anymore. They were watching her dignity, her silence, her calm, her data, her truth, and the contrast was glaring. In a small town in Alabama, a city council meeting was interrupted by a black father holding up a poster with Jasmine's quote, "You keep telling me how far we've come, but I see how far people will go to pretend we're already there." He wasn't there to protest. He was there to speak. His daughter had been suspended for disruptive behavior after correcting her teacher in class about the Tulsa massacre. He hadn't planned to fight it. He didn't want trouble. But then he saw Jasmine, and he remembered, truth is only dangerous to those protecting a lie. And Jasmine, she went back to work. No fanfare, she drafted a new community health oversight bill. She sat on committee hearings about racial equity in federal contracting. She took 3 constituent calls a night, just like before. But something was different now. People looked at her differently, not as that black congresswoman from Texas, not just as the one who went viral, but as something deeper, as a reminder that truth can be told without theatrics, that control is not the absence of anger. It's the refusal to let anger choose your words, that you can be powerful without being loud, and still shake the foundations of a room built to ignore you. The final ripple came from the most unexpected place. A college-age white man from Idaho, with a baseball cap and no political affiliation, posted a 90-second video from his truck. No edits, no hashtags, just this. "I didn't grow up around black people. I didn't think racism was real anymore. But after watching that lady on Bill Maher, I realized I've never had to survive what she has. And I've never had to carry my truth in silence. That's what hit me. That's what made me want to learn." He ended with, "If that's what politics could be, I might finally give a damn." And in that, Jasmine Crockett didn't just break the silence. She made space for thousands of others to finally speak. Not with rage, not with pity, but with purpose. It started with a laugh and ended in a silence so honest it echoed across the country. One woman, one voice, no theatrics, no shouting, no punchlines, just truth, spoken like a scalpel, not a sword. Jasmine Crockett didn't show up to prove she was strong. She showed us that sometimes strength looks like stillness, that sometimes the sharpest resistance isn't noise, it's refusal. Refusal to lie, refusal to pretend, refusal to smile through pain just to make others comfortable. In a world where too many confuse loud with right, she reminded us, power doesn't cancel pain, it exposes it. She didn't win a debate, she shifted a culture. She opened a door, and she reminded every single one of us that progress isn't measured by who gets a seat at the table, it's measured by who's allowed to speak once they're seated. This story is a dramatized and fictionalized account meant to reflect real struggles in modern America. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. Now, before you go, take a breath. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Tap like to help stories like this reach those who need to hear them. Subscribe if you want more narratives that challenge power without chasing spectacle. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit hardest for you. And share this with someone who still believes the quietest people often carry the deepest truths. Because maybe the next Jasmine Crockett isn't in office yet. Maybe she's just waiting for a sign that her voice matters. Maybe she's watching now, and if she is, we hear you, we see you, and we're not looking away.